Well, hey, everybody. I am here with Dr. Lou Agosta. He is a PhD in psychology and psychotherapy. He's also an author and specialist in the topic of empathy. He is on the School of Professional Psychology for Illinois. And Lou, it's just such a pleasure to have you. Welcome to the show today.
Thank you, Tarun. I'm so happy to be here. Really delighted to mix it up. I must issue a slight correction up front. My PhD actually
Please.
is in philosophy. I am a
Okay.
psychotherapist, but just
Okay.
just to dot the I's and split the T's. And I did write, even in philosophy, a number of years ago, quite a few.
Yeah.
I wrote, my dissertation was entitled Empathy and Interpretation. So I have been
Okay.
working on it for a while. That my integrity is
Great.
intact here. Great to be here.
Thank you for the clarification. Either way, it is a pleasure to have you. And I'm really excited to talk to you today. As I mentioned to you before we started recording, I have a little bit of an amateur interest in psychology and psychotherapy, and it has some relation to what I do as a trainer for teachers in behavior management. And so I'm really excited to talk to you today. A few episodes ago, I had a man by the name of Troy Hamilton on the program, and he was talking about the art of listening. And it's something that I have been particularly engaged with because I know in my own self, it's something that I've had to develop as a leader to become a more attentive listener. And as I've looked at your work, one of the aspects of empathy that you talk about is just the ability to listen intently. So why don't you just give us a little bit of an introduction to start off with about empathy and what you see it as being?
Well, yes, great. I want to say to start with listening is the right place to start. Before I actually give a definition of empathy, I mean, best practice, we want to define our terms.
Yes.
How I do want to say that in the world of listening, empathy is about being fully present with the other person.
Yeah.
And so listening is the way to start with that, to be open to the other person, to be receptive to the other person, to be with the other person without anything else added. If they're quiet, you get to be with them quietly. Oftentimes, the other person will have something to say. There'll be something they want to say, they want to tell, they want to communicate. And let me right up front, I got an idea. Let's just go with it. The 1 minute empathy training.
Okay.
It actually takes less than a minute. And then we can branch out from that. It is all about listening. But basically, here it is in a single statement. Drive out, eliminate judgment, evaluation, cynicism, drive out aggression, drive out bullying, drive out bad language, drive out judgments, evaluations of any kind, and empathy naturally comes forth. People want to be empathic. The vast majority of human beings will be empathic to you, to me, to one another, if given half a chance.
Yeah.
And so that's less than a minute, right? But you can
Yeah.
see there's some work to be done here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I'm walking down the street, looking at people like in the big city where I live here in Chicago, in the States. I'm walking down the street. I must say, I'm a nice person. You're just going to have to take my word for it for the moment. I'm a nice guy. I'm walking down the street and having devaluing thoughts about people. That person's too big. That person's too little. That person's too wide. How did that person get that way? What happened to that person? It's so, I tell you the truth, that's not who I authentically am. I'm a welcoming, accepting person, but I stop and talk to the person, all of that stuff automatically evaporates. Once I meet the person, it's no longer there. But I think, I'm inviting you and the listener to try that one on. That's not just a confession coming from me. Try that one on, because I'm not saying it's the truth with a capital T, but consider the possibility that often we've got in our heads a voice over talking about what we think about what's going on. Have I heard that before? What do I know? What do I not know? When have I heard this? And it gets in the way
Yeah.
of
And
our
I'm so
listening.
glad you said that, because I know with myself, I would consider myself a naturally empathetic, or try to be a kind and generous person when I interact with others. But I'm very aware of that judgmental voice that lives in my head. And, you made the comment walking down the street and you're making snap judgments about every person that walks past. I've often wondered if that was just me or whether that's normal. Why do you think it is? Because you said that we are naturally empathic, but yet we all seem to have this natural propensity to make snap judgments before we have had the chance to get to know an individual. It seems like there are contradictory ideas, but why do you think that happens?
Well, I don't know. I'm going to be straight with you. I don't know
Mm,
how we got to be this way. Um, the idea is, if that's the case, there are some things we can do about it, namely interrupt
sure.
the process. I mean, but let me take a moment and just riff on that a little bit.
Yeah,
At,
please.
at a high level, these human beings are an aggressive species.
Mm,
I'm looking at Google News here in the States. I mean, before the pandemic, before the epidemic, it's human beings have gotten to be the way they are.
mm,
Aggression and sexuality are the two big things we have to deal with. Now, just because we're born that way doesn't mean we have to stay that way.
yeah,
That's called growing up. That's
yeah.
called becoming socialized. That's called learning some manners, right? I
Mm,
mean, there was this famous book, Everything I Needed to Know, I Learned in Kindergarten. It was a big
okay.
hit here in the States. This is old news, right? So he gets a plug. God bless him. I don't, man or woman. Um, Share, take turns,
Yeah.
stop and listen,
Mm,
raise your hand and be called on. That's the idea. So
yeah.
I think we are an aggressive species, and to an extent, life on planet Earth, our ancestors, our early ancestors, living on the plain of present day Tanzania, we're talking
Mm,
short hominids, fighting
mm,
off hostile neighbors and large aggressive cats, lions,
yeah.
and or tigers, saber tooth, everything.
Yeah.
It's helpful to be aggressive if you're under attack. But
Mm,
meanwhile, let's put it this way. In the business world, let's,
mm,
fast shift. I'm going to
yeah.
do a fast shift. Okay. We're going
Please
to
go
go
for it.
from, for the evolution, the environment of evolutionary origin, where early
Mm,
hominids have to be aggressive to survive. Fast
mm,
forward, a couple of 100,000 years, and here we are in the modern corporation. I mean,
mm,
even education is a modern corporation. Medicine
absolutely.
is get your numbers. How many patients can people? It can go off the rails.
Mm,
Nevertheless, there's something to be said for doing the work, for doing the job, for making the numbers. Nevertheless, the things that make business people successful, being competitive,
mm,
solving technical problems, beating the competition, solving legal problems, getting revenue to fall to the bottom line are important. And yet, when you think about it, these are not the kind of things that necessarily expand our empathy.
no. You mentioned at the beginning about the two drives in human beings, our tendency for aggression and our tendency for sex, seem to be very powerful drivers. And then you went on to talk about, really it's tied to our need for survival. That survival instinct in human beings is so strong that in a modern world, we perhaps don't have the same fears for our survival, but yet that instinct is still very strong, and our need to be in control of our environments, to be in control of our relationships for the sake of personal advantage, is still a very strong trait in humanity. I mean, you see this in social media, even just the need to dominate people in social media. Um, how do we, as human beings, being that is such an overwhelming natural tendency, how do we begin the journey of managing that or bringing it under control? I know you said that it starts when we're young, but we all have to wrestle our demons or our shadow self, as as it would be. How do we start that journey of bringing those natural tendencies under control so that empathy can actually shine through and become present?
And the answer is, amazingly enough, I think I have at least the start of an answer.
Mm.
Work on boundaries.
Okay.
Boundaries are very important. In kindergarten, boundaries are important. I got my little seat. My neighbors got their seat. The lesson at that point was keep one's hands to oneself. That's
Yes.
not bad guidance, given
Yeah.
to allow education to occur. An American poet, right, Robert Frost.
Mm.
Good fences make good neighbors, not
Right.
walls.
Mm.
Fences. He wrote a poem. Good fences make good neighbors. And he didn't even like that neighbor. I mean, I
Right.
think there were some issues there. He wasn't very happy, but they were good neighbors. They got
Yeah.
on. Something is, I quote the first line or so, something is that doesn't like a wall.
Mm.
Walls are very problematic. Here's what I would add to it: be firm about boundaries, and in the fence, not the wall, in the fence, there's a gate. And
Right.
over the gate is the word empathy.
Right.
To cross back and forth the boundary. And so, how does that work? Whenever there's a breakdown,
Mm.
whenever you see a breakdown in the corporate world, in the education world, in the health, oftentimes there's a boundary issue and a
Yeah.
boundary violation, right? I mean, that's a problem, right? I mean, the authorities have to intervene when somebody doesn't respect the boundaries. I
Mm.
grab your stuff. That's bad. It's called stealing, right? That's
Yeah.
not going to work, right? I mean,
Yeah.
and also in language too. I mean, this matter of bullying comes
Mm.
up in the corporate world. I mean, we're not going to have a deep discussion about politics, but if you look at politicians all around the planet,
Mm.
sometimes politicians get successful by being bullies. They
Sure.
can kind of bully their way through it. And what
Mm.
does that mean? That means disrespecting boundaries.
Yeah.
Disrespecting, but you see that in certain kinds of demagogues and yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't even want to say right or left. I mean, they're both going nuts and mixing it up. But when
Yeah.
things really start to break down, it is often due to inattention,
Mm.
disrespect, and when people don't get the respect, the dignity, the empathy they feel they
Mm.
deserve, when the boundaries have not been respected,
Mm.
people get enraged.
Yeah.
People get
Absolutely.
really angry. And by the time the first guy throws a rock, it's no longer a conversation about empathy.
No.
Once the rocks or the, God forbid, the Molotov cocktails start flying back and forth, then it's a breakdown of empathy. What one has to
Yeah.
do is declare the breakdown. And sometimes intervention of the authorities is needed to restore order
Sure.
so that we can have a halfway reasonable conversation and try to reach an agreement about what to build or what to unbuild, what to tear down or what to build up. I mean, I think this is why, I mean, this is what so that's a long-winded answer. To the concise answer there is more attention to boundaries
Yeah.
and to keeping one's agreements, right? The boundary, I agree, here's the boundary line. We agree, this apple tree is on my side of the fence. If some of the
Yeah.
apples fall
I'm
on your
so
side,
with
you
you.
get to keep them.
I'm so with you on the boundary topic, because that's probably the number one area that I find I have to talk into when I'm working with teachers and also leaders. When there is a relationship breakdown with the people that they are working with, it's often a breakdown of clearly defined expectations and boundaries. Um, I want to pursue that boundary thought a little bit more. I just feel that we we need to say a little bit more to define empathy. I think we skirted over it, assuming that our listeners know
Yeah.
what we're talking about. Could you give me a concise definition of what you view empathy to be?
Yes. Empathy is a four-phase way of being with another person. Empathy is the form of relatedness to another person in which I'm open to the other person. I get who they are as a possibility. I, in effect, take a walk in their shoes if I'm not getting who they are. And I give back to the other person what I have gotten in the form of recognition and acknowledgement of their humanity and of what the other person, is dealing with. So
Right.
those four phases. And, I mean, having anticipated what I don't, it's so that, I mean, that's the four aspects of empathy: receptivity,
Mm.
understanding, interpretation, and acknowledgement. And each of these four phases, we can talk more about this, can break down. And there's
Sure.
real power in seeing where the process breaks down.
Okay. So in essence, we're looking at empathy as the act of putting oneself in another's shoes to understand how they see the world, why they respond the way they respond, and then out of that understanding, be able to be congenial towards them, regardless of whether you agree on their point of view or not. Would that be a fair?
Well, so here's now we go to, this is so bad. We're going to go to school, right? I
Yeah.
gave you four dimensions, and you gave me back
Yes.
the walk in the other person's shoes. When I
Right.
get stuck as to what's going on with you,
Yeah.
then I get my cognition going. It's top
Okay.
down empathy at that point. But empathy,
Okay.
essentially, as I understand it, and as I
Mm.
get it to work best, when people come and visit me and they say, Dr. Lou, I'm suffering, or, blah, 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 there's something they're dealing with. It
Mm.
really requires looking at all four dimensions of being
Okay.
open to the other person. So be with them, like, that's the listening part.
Yeah.
That's the empathic listening. That's the understanding, like, who really is this person as a
Mm.
possibility? And and then the walk in the shoes is often needed to really traverse the differences in the details in my life and your life, and we're coming from different spots, and the empathy to really complete it. I got to
Mm.
give you back what I got as to who you are in such a way that you acknowledge me. Yeah, Lou, you got what I was dealing with.
Mm. Mm.
So, I mean, to have full, now the other stuff is good. It's like, yeah, we're going in the right direction. There's an empathic intention, an empathic engagement, an empathic understanding, but it's incomplete until
Yeah.
we really get it completed with, I acknowledge, I give you back something in such a way that you get it, that I get you.
Great. Yeah. I hear you. So in many ways, empathy starts in ourselves long before we ever engage with another person. It has to be an attitude that we bring to our relationships and our interactions with another person. A determination that I'm going to find ways to acknowledge and to see that person for who they are. Would you say that that's an important starting point for empathy?
I mean, I got to work on myself.
Mm.
I'm walking down the street thinking what I'm thinking, having devaluing thoughts about people that are too wide or
Mm.
not, or too tall, or what. I mean, I'm telling on myself, right? I've got to
Yeah.
engage with my blind spot,
Yeah.
right? I mean, now everybody, I mean, be proud, right? Most people have a blind spot. The
Absolutely.
poor person dreams of riches. The rich person dreams of peace of mind. Who am I that I dream of? I don't know what I dream of. I dream of a world in which people actually get along And
Yeah.
I get now the guy who is trying to give empathy dreams of getting empathy himself.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, we could go, I came up in such a way that I had it that I didn't get enough empathy.
Mm.
And so I started working on it. I mean, actually
Mm.
wrote a couple of books on the subject in an attempt to capture the empathy that I felt I was missing in coming up. And so, yeah, I mean, this is by way of agreement. I mean, you're saying, work on yourself, and it starts. Where else would it start, right? I mean, people are pointing fingers here, there, and everywhere. I mean, that finger, right? I mean, we could do this on camera. That finger
Yeah.
starts coming around, and all of a sudden, it points where it needs to point. I got to
Absolutely.
clean up my stuff, and then I can be there for the other person.
So good.
And
I think it was Carl Jung that talked about the shadow self and said that the shadow self, the part that we like least of ourselves, is often how we project that onto others in the way that we treat them. So while we're actually angry with ourselves, we take that aggression out on others. What does that mean for empathy if we're talking about perhaps somebody who lacks empathy for another? It perhaps could start with the fact that they lack empathy for themselves and find it difficult to accept and love themselves. And so to ask them to accept and love another person is such a monumental task if they fail to do it in themselves. What would you say to somebody that perhaps struggles to give themselves the right empathy?
yeah, I mean, that's so great. I mean, and you can never miss with Jung and the shadow. I mean,
Mm.
he 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 got empathy. I mean, he understood it. And here's the thing. I got to get empathy coming up as a kid, as a developing young adult, as an adult. I got to get some empathy in order to be able to give it away.
Yeah.
I mean, I meet a lot of people who are burned out.
Mm.
I'm not expecting a lot of empathy from somebody who's surviving their life, surviving their job, surviving their bully of a boss. Now, you could say, well, they got something to do with that. And that would be true. They do.
Yeah. Sure.
Nevertheless, the way it lives in the moment is that they're not available for an empathic relatedness where they're able to give. It's just not, I mean, it's just not fair.
Yeah.
And so I'm partially answering your question. I mean, what's that person going to do? Well, how do you take better care of yourself, right? That's a good, we might start with that. It's not always clear because I need my job, and then, we got all these issues and the pandemic didn't suddenly fix them. How about that's
Yeah.
like not
Yeah.
funny. That's
Yeah.
really not funny. I mean, and so we've got, all of these other considerations which are making the world even more complicated. And so what you do is you do what you can do.
Yeah.
You try to find somebody where you can get the empathy you need. Now you
Yeah.
can work on yourself. I mean, if you're sitting in front of the tube, right, the telly, and that, I'm like, I want to riff on the Beatles. If you've gone pictures, if you're carrying pictures of Chairman Mao or
Yeah.
spending a lot of hours in front of the television, you ain't going to make it with anyone anyhow. I quote, end quote. So you got to work on yourself. Like you got to get out. I mean, you could start a vigorous walk, whatever, don't hurt yourself, right? Don't
Yeah.
sprain your
Sure.
ankle, but start getting some exercise. Start
Yeah.
eating right. Start like I was going to say respecting yourself by what you take into your body, by what you do with your body. The human body is the best picture of the soul. The human body is the best picture of the mind. And when people are lower back pains, migraines, headaches, unexplained aches and pains, not saying that there's nothing wrong, but definitely see your medical doctor, get checked out. But a lot of times it's somaticizing the stress. And so here's the thing. I mean, if you're experiencing compassion fatigue, if you're experiencing burnout, you got to hit the pause button.
Yeah.
maybe, I mean, this is a radical statement. I'm going to put it on the camera. I'm going to put it on the tape. If you're experiencing compassion fatigue, maybe
Mm.
you're being too compassionate.
Right.
Now, what does that mean? I'm not saying be mean. I'm not
Mm.
saying be hard hearted. I'm
Yeah.
not saying, you know, don't be kind to animals and children. Definitely
Mm.
do be kind and
Mm.
be nice to your neighbor. But there is a sense in which, I mean, I got to go with the Gospels on this one. I mean,
Yeah.
in the story of the Good Samaritan, the first two guys pass by, the
Mm.
survivor of that robbery. They actually experienced empathic distress. It's not
Right.
so much that they were hard hearted, they just couldn't deal with all that suffering
Yeah.
and had to take some distance. That's an interpretation, of course. I mean, you can make it mean, you can make it mean that they were
Sure.
a couple of losers, but I think that
Yeah.
would just dealing with compassion fatigue. They just couldn't
Mm.
handle it, and they crossed the road. But here's the lesson: if I could dial empathy down by crossing the road,
Mm.
I could possibly also dial it up.
Right.
And so empathy is not so much an on-off switch as
Mm.
it is a dial, a tuner. And to that person, possibly even you or me on a given day, who's like, I'm not making it. I'm like really not doing that well here. I need some
Yeah.
empathy. Maybe you got to dial it down and take care of yourself before you can dial it up and take care of others. Now
Yeah.
that's easier said than done.
For sure. And
Nevertheless,
I love your analogy of a dial, because I think you're so spot on when you talk about people who are highly empathic and how they can actually cause themselves fatigue, because not everybody is as empathic as they are, and they can often feel hurt by those around them because they don't receive back the same level of empathy that they give out on a constant basis. Um, I probably I've often joked with my wife that I'm probably less empathic than she is. She's an extraordinarily empathic person and would take the shirt off her back for a stranger. I find that I've probably, as you've been talking, I would say I probably started off like that once upon a time,
yeah.
but over the years have dialed it back because I found the fatigue of either not receiving it in the same way or people taking advantage of it has caused me to become a little bit self-protective. And so while I can still dial up my empathy, I find that I tend to be a little bit more guarded about how I relate to people. Um, and I find myself feeling guilty for that. How do
Well,
we
you
how
may
do
want
we
to take a
walk the
look at
line?
that.
Yeah, how do we walk the line between having good boundaries
Yeah.
but not allowing it to make us jaded or cynical or closed off to the world?
Well, I mean, that's a $64,000 question. I mean,
Yeah.
right, it is about boundaries. It is about being firm about your boundaries. No, that's not how I want to help you today. I don't
Mm,
want to give you money today. Here's a
mm,
here's a card where you can get some help. Here's a card where you can get out of the cold if you go to this
yeah.
location. Or maybe I buy the person a sandwich rather than
Mm,
give them money. I've often
sure.
been, I mean, this is kind of an on the street example, which
Yeah.
here
Yeah.
in the big city in Chicago, there's homelessness. This is really
Yeah.
distressing.
Yeah.
And, we can give a lot of story around that, but nevertheless, in
Yeah.
the moment, somebody saying, help me. And,
Yeah.
I get to decide how
Yeah.
can I help and how much can I help? So,
Yeah.
like you say, I mean, you may want to interrupt the thought that, I'm a jerk because I don't do that. I mean, how useful is
Mm,
that thought? I'm not
yeah.
saying it's not true. I'm
No.
saying, get in touch with your inner jerk. You gotta. I mean, this
Yeah.
is edgy. This is the cynicism that we want to drive out.
Yeah. Sure.
Nevertheless, on a given day, why should I expect to help everyone? I gotta get through my day. You don't know the tough customers.
Yeah.
Now, it is true that, I mean, when the Lord shows up, it's usually as a beggar, as
Yeah.
opposed to I don't know. I mean, somebody wearing purple robes and a crown on their head, right? Who looks like
Sure.
King Philip or something. Just keep that one in mind. Nevertheless, you
Yeah.
got to do what you can do, and
Yeah.
so interrupt the thought that there's something wrong here. You and powerfully decide if I can help or if I can't help. And when can I help? And how much can I do? And it should hurt a little bit, but it shouldn't, I shouldn't be traumatized by it. Because if I'm traumatized by it, then I'm a wreck. And it's not, I mean, it's like, then it's the compassion fatigue with which people who are committed and dedicated, I mean, you do see this in medical education, in the helping professions of various kinds. It's really a struggle. It's really a struggle. And so that's where empathy lessons come in handy. That's the short answer, which is completely inadequate, but completely accurate. Practice.
Yeah.
Empathy
Absolutely.
is a practice. The more I practice, the better I get at it. Funny thing. If I practice, I get better at it. I may make mistakes. I learn from my mistakes. I may get it right. Do more of that. I mess it up. Do less of that. Here's the thing. This is kind of like, delete the kind of like. There's enough empathy to go around, and it doesn't show up that way.
Yeah.
You know how we can feed everybody on the planet? Thanks to agribusiness and green revolution, when you pile up all the food, all the wheat and soybeans and whatever, chicken and fish, when you pile that up, there's enough to give everybody enough food so that nobody has to get sick from malnutrition or die of starvation. But there are people starving. There are people starving in Asia and Africa. There are people starving in the city of Chicago who are suffering from malnutrition. What's going on with that? Why is that? Well, I suggest an analogy with empathy. I mean, it's because food is used for politics. I mean, it's weaponized. It becomes, starve the enemy. I mean, it's because of human aggression and bad behavior, and the politicalization in the negative, pejorative sense of the use of food. Similar with empathy. There's enough empathy to go around, and it doesn't show up that way. People withhold. People are, good news is, it doesn't actually require agribusiness to create more empathy. It lives in human behavior and in human language. Of course, well, I mean, we can debate once again the boundaries, but there is enough empathy to go around, and empathy itself calls forth empathy.
Yeah. And I hear you. Again, we've come back to that whole idea of boundaries and being able to say no, or to be able to put space or distance between yourself and another person if it's encroaching on your ability to keep balance for yourself. And I think with a lot of in education, a lot of the people I work with, because they are naturally empathic to be in caring professions, that idea of saying no, that idea of putting up a boundary and saying, you know what, I care about you, but I cannot accept that you treat me in that fashion or you speak to me in that fashion. That's a difficult thing for people to do if they're naturally empathic. They find it very hard to say no. And yet that seems to be the lesson that is so needed if we're to develop good balance for empathy.
Practice. You have to practice. And I mean, it's useful to practice. There's no other way to get good at it. And that's why it gets me crazy when, I read various celebrity academics say, yeah, you either got it or you don't got it. Well, I assert it's a normal distribution. Most people have got some. Now, there are the skinny edges where some people maybe arguably don't have enough. And on the other end of the normal distribution, there's a skinny edges where some people arguably maybe have too much. They're too open. But there's a lot of buts in that conversation. And you're saying, one has to, there's no easy answer other than to practice. And ultimately, the fallback position is to acknowledge the other person. I acknowledge you. I get it. You need $20 right now. This is not going to work. It doesn't work for me to give you $20 right now. I get it. I mean, you leave the other person. There's nothing wrong with asking. Now, if they're calling your names, you could say, I mean, devaluing names, right? You could say, I really have a concern about the use of that language. That language doesn't work with me. And I mean, presuming I could keep my wits about me, right? Once
Yeah.
somebody insults a person, it can quickly go south.
Goes hard. Yeah.
A dignity violation, a loss of respect, which is to say a loss of empathy, people get enraged. So how do you restore the integrity to the situation when you say, that's not okay. That's not going to work for me here. And ultimately you declare a breakdown. The communication is in breakdown. We're just not, I need a timeout. I'm going to take a timeout. Yeah, if you can, leave the room. I mean, if you can, walk outside, get some fresh air, or whatever that looks like. This needs a time. I mean, just declare a breakdown. I mean, then we're not going to have to rejigger this conversation on another occasion. So intervene in a way that leaves both people in integrity, where I mean integrity, wholeness, emotionally complete. I don't mean right or wrong, ethical or unethical. I mean, it's not good to call people names or, but whatever people get confronted and start reacting, and rarely does one reaction, reaction often leads to reaction and misunderstanding. And so how to recover from that? One has to keep one's wits about one. And as you say, in so many contexts, I mean, I look at empathy as a way. This kind of segues to a related but a new topic, as a way of data gathering about the other person. Tell me about yourself, right? I mean, there's a famous interviewer. I forget, she begins front page in New York, she begins every conversation with the phrase, "Tell me about yourself." Now, we kind of did that here. So, I mean, we're in integrity here. We're doing fine. Never, it's like to get a sense of who is this other person as a possibility and what are they up to. And oftentimes, I mean, if a person is angry about something, or broken up or upset, a more neutral word even. You can be upset in a lot of different ways, including anger, including sadness, including fear. Give them a little, if you can keep your wits and give them a little empathy. Wow, that's really tough. It sounds like you've really been dealing with some difficult stuff. If you give, I mean, I'm almost saying at this point, sometimes that'll just like, oh, wow, give you an opening. Now they might still keep coming at you. And you give it to them again. Wow, that's really different. And they start to de-escalate.
Yeah. Do you find that it seems that the rules of engagement are becoming more and more blurred in human interaction? I feel like when I was growing up, the cultural norms of what was appropriate and what was not appropriate seemed to be fairly well accepted across different demographics. And with the rise of, I guess, postmodernist thinking and this moral relativism, it's like everybody has a boundary based on what they perceive the world to be. And even if you're attempting to engage in a respectful dialogue, for some people that is viewed as hostile. There's even now the co-opting of words that are considered to be hateful, or words that are considered to be microaggression, when they were never treated in that fashion before. But now it's almost a minefield to even have a dialogue with somebody on differing opinions, lest you stray into the territory that they've defined as unreasonable.
I hope I'm not interrupting you. I mean, but I think I know where you're going
please.
with this one.
Yeah.
It sounds like you've been dealing with some tough customers, with all of these guys you're interviewing, men and women both, who've got something to tell you and want to get their message out. And it can't be helpful to be a little bit angry, to get your energy going. Because then one is more, I don't know, more is maybe not the best word, but then one expands one's capabilities for self-expression. My take on it is you've been dealing with some tough customers. And and the coaching, I got to coach the coach here because you're the coach. And they come in, and I mean, I do actually believe there are such things as microaggressions. They tend to be below the threshold of perception. And eventually they do add up, and then one has to acknowledge them. Nevertheless, I'm sticking to my story. The commitment is to create a space of acceptance and tolerance in which whatever you, other person, the other is dealing with can come forth. And, and somebody comes in and they've got an issue and they've got something they want to communicate and they're hot about something or they're whatever they are about it, give them a good listening. It doesn't mean, that's the thing. Empathy doesn't mean agreement.
Yeah.
It doesn't even mean niceness. It doesn't mean be mean. It doesn't mean be disagreeable. It means let it be. And that can be enormously powerful. If you can act, if one can actually get there and be with whatever's in the space, that can be mind bending. I mean, it can be world transforming even. I mean, people come away from conversations feeling that they've been gotten for the first time ever, that finally somebody understands them, or at least has, I mean, or not. I mean, and then if it doesn't work, then you get to continue. I mean, then you get to continue to try. There's no guarantee. So I hear what you're saying. I mean, guess what? Take that difficult customer, as my empathy trainer.
Yeah.
If I can't deal with it, where am I? I'm so, I might succeed, I might not, or I might, good chance that I'll get it partially right. And then I'll learn something. Good chance that, I'll make some mistakes from which I can learn. I mean, if hopefully nothing too serious, but now, I mean, that's actually a complete thought. I mean, take the other person as one's empathy trainer. The tough in business, the tough customer, in education, the kid who doesn't quite fit in, says it's just like, what's going on here? We're not clear. I mean, in healthcare, well, we're not sure what the diagnosis is. We're pulling out our hair. This is not a problem that I have. Nevertheless, you see, take that. That's the opportunity. That's the possibility of really having a breakthrough, of bringing forth empathy where there hadn't been some before.
Yeah, that's so good. And so it's really, it's all about maintaining the focus on your own ability to convey or use empathy, regardless of the other person's ability to respond in a like manner. My wife and I do a lot of work in the church community, and one of the expressions that we use is the grace growers, the people that are difficult, that teach us how to grow a grace fueled attitude towards life. And you say that the empathy trainers, I like that. There are, in every interaction we have opportunities to develop our own level of empathy, regardless of how they respond to us in kind. I want to just press this a little bit
May I
further.
express agreement?
Yeah,
I mean,
please.
2 thumbs up on that one. I mean, that's so important. Whatever the context. I mean, yeah.
Great.
You were saying.
So I want to push this thought a little bit further. I kind of suspect I know what you're going to say, but in education, often we'll work with children who either have come from homes where empathy has not been taught, or they have some kind of diagnosis where empathy levels or understandings of empathy are very low. And we often talk in education, and maybe this happens in the workplace with leadership as well, about helping people to develop empathy. Would you say that it's even possible to help another person develop empathy, or does it really fall back on them? You just have to be as empathetic as you can be and hope that something of your character rubs off on them. Is there anything you can do to help people that lack or
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is you work on it, the empathy expands. What it looks like, I mean, is the person explicitly asking to help expand their empathy? Or are they just struggling with whatever they're struggling with? I mean, it's a different drill. Then you just got to do your best to model the empathy that they are intended to assimilate, to take up. If they explicitly ask for empathy, green light, that this is good news. We can work on it. You take it up a level, you think about it, you practice it, you get better, you get worse at it, you get better at it. You have a breakdown, the breakdown leads to a breakthrough. In the case of, there was a great article. I mean, this is like an article, I don't know whether it's the 1950s or something. Christine Olden on
Okay.
adult empathy with children.
Right.
Whenever, I'll give it to you in a single sentence. That's not a very
Mm.
long article. It's I don't know, 10 pages or something. Whenever I'm in the presence of an 8-year-old,
Mm.
I am present to what happened to me as an 8-year-old. Whenever I'm,
Right.
it doesn't go back behind about 5 years old. I mean, I have one or two memories before 5 years old, like most people do. Whenever
Yeah.
I'm in the presence of a teenager, I'm present to what I dealt with as a teenager. Now,
Mm.
that's the hazard and the
Mm.
opportunity both, because I mean, I had to deal with some bullying. We can do another session on that, right? I
Sure.
had to
Sure.
do, I'm present. I mean, now, but that may or may not be relevant to this particular person, right? So I have
Right.
to set that aside and see. I mean, it could get in the way, and now, or it could be facilitative. It could be useful, right? But I mean, the tough thing to do is to make the call. And so, I mean, there are people who maybe are not as attentive to social clues, who
Mm.
don't perceive what we call social clues, who don't
Mm.
pick up on feelings the way a standard, get the normal distribution. Most people
Yeah.
experience anger, fear, sadness, and high spirits, right? The big
Mm.
four. So high spirits, happiness, a kind of happiness, right? I mean, then we have this sophisticated things like guilt and jealousy and envy and righteous indignation, and it gets complicated, right? But the big
Yeah.
four, I mean, maybe, when I went to kindergarten, they didn't assume I know the name of colors. They quizzed me,
Mm.
do you know the difference between red, yellow, blue, green, the spectrum, right?
Mm.
Now, I knew about chartreuse. So I got tracked on this is a joke. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I can't. If I have to explain the joke, it's not funny. I knew what chartreuse was, so I got put on the kindergarten track that was headed in the direction of Harvard. I never
Right.
actually made it there. It's okay.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I can't resist the joke. It's not.
No. No.
If I have to explain the joke, but never. But what about feelings? We don't necessarily explain feelings to children the way we explain colors or
Yeah.
words. Johnny and Jill are playing together with dolls.
Mm.
An action figure. That would be for the boy, a doll is an action figure, right?
Yeah.
And Jane grabs John's action figure, and John is angry and goes to
Mm.
hit her on over the head, and the parent wisely intervenes.
Mm.
Johnny, take a timeout.
Mm.
We don't hit our sister over the head with our action figure. You're feeling angry. Take a timeout, 5 minutes in the corner, or whatever it is. Okay. Scenario B. Same story. Johnny, we love our sister. Take a timeout.
Mm.
You see you see. I mean, now if this happens once, it's not a big deal. He's
Yeah.
now a little bit confused about what he's experiencing. Is it what you and I would call anger? And he's getting ready to hit her on the head, so we think it is anger. Is this love? It
Mm.
hadn't showed up like love before, and now
Mm.
now if it happens one time, it's no big deal. Who cares, right? I mean,
Mm.
it's not going to make it. But what if it happens 30 times? Now Johnny is confused about the meaning of the words.
Yeah.
And this is a vast oversimplification, but it can be that the challenge for all of us is to experience our experience. If we're angry, to experience our anger. If we're sad, to experience our sadness. If we're
Mm.
affectionate and experiencing affinity, to experience that. Or high spirits, I mean, easier said than done sometimes. We're
Yeah.
walking around like we know what we should be experiencing. That politician did what a blah, blah, blah. I should be experiencing this. And if I'm not,
Mm.
what's wrong with me? Or what's
Yeah.
wrong with him? Or what's wrong with and so that's the empathy training to experience one's experience. And that requires clearing away all of this other stuff, all of the judgments, the evaluations, the cynicism, the resignation, the whatever I had to learn to survive,
Yeah.
the decisions that I made when things didn't go my way. And I said, well, and whatever I decided. So that's part of what at least the beginning of the training looks like.
Yeah, that's so good, and I appreciate you so much giving us those uh, in-depth looks at the approach we need to take to developing empathy. Now, you've actually tried to make this really easy for people. You've written a book called The Lazy Person's Guide to Empathy. Can you tell us a little bit about your book and
Yes. Now
how
this
people
gets
may
me
be able to
now a
access
man
it?
who gets empathy. Okay, thank you. The lazy person's empathy, a lazy person's guide, is a
Yeah,
lighthearted look at the subject.
sure.
It, I've written peer-reviewed stuff. My friends came to me and said, "Lou, it's great, but could you like try to translate it into more what you might say the average citizen or layperson could understand?"
Yeah,
I was listening. And the result is empathy, a lazy person. If you're trying too hard, dial it back.
yeah,
It should be possible. You don't need an expert to be
yeah,
empathic. Every parent, every mother, father, sister, brother, every kid, every young person understands empathy. Now, an expert may be able to help a bit in clarifying some distinctions, in getting us clearer. And this lazy person's guide contains 28 illustrations by that
great.
celebrated artist, Alexandra Zonas, who also happens to be my wife. So it's a
Great.
family project. And if you get tired of reading the text, you can just look at the pictures.
Just look at the pictures. I love it. Is it suitable for younger audiences, or is it mainly pitched at adults?
It's not a kid's book. It's not a
No,
children's book. I
no.
mean, we need to have one of those. I mean, I think,
Sure.
maybe that's the next project.
Maybe that's the next family project.
Yeah. Thank you for
Fantastic.
that.
Lou, oh, no. We will put a link in our description on how people can connect with you. So you've got a website,
I
which is your
do.
name,
It's very,
Lou
I mean,
Agosta.
you can reach me at louagosta.com. You got to
Hmm.
spell my name right, though.
Yeah, and I'll
Lou.
put the spelling.
Yeah, thank you. And also empathy lessons, www.empathylessons.com.
Ah, good, good.
That's I
Uh,
blog there, and if you look on the right hand side, there's contact data and stuff. Thank you for that, though.
Fantastic.
Thank you. I appreciate
Oh
that.
no, not at all. And if people want to reach out to you and maybe connect with you, do you use social media? And are you happy for people to connect on
I
social
am
media?
happy. I am happy. I tend to be a light touch on
Hmm.
Facebook. I am out there, and
Okay.
on I'm out there. But you can Lou Agosta at gmail.com. I do check my email
Okay.
periodically. I mean, I'm responsive. Part of empathy is being responsive. Now,
Yes.
mention that you heard, you got an idea on this conversation with
Sure.
Tarun Stevenson, as opposed to, but so thank you for that. I appreciate that. I mean, the commitment
Not at all.
is to expand empathy in the
Yeah.
individual and the community, to expand empathy in the individual and the community. I am enthusiastic about that. And I think, one conversation at a time.
Yeah. Well,
This has
I
been
can
a great
honestly
one.
say I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and you've taught me so much, and I'm looking forward to continuing to grow in my empathy and my understanding of empathy in my own work. But I'm so grateful for your time today, Lou. Thank you, and I'm looking forward to having future conversations with you on the
My
topic.
pleasure.
Thank you so much.